In this video, we will be learning about something called the midpoint formula. The midpoint formula can be used when you're trying to find the coordinates of the midpoint of a segment and you have the two endpoints of the segment. So if you have 2 points, let's just call the first point x1, y1, and then the second point x2, y2. To find the midpoint between those 2 points, you would use this formula. So I'm going to say M stands for midpoint would equal x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So essentially, you're just adding the x coordinates together and dividing those by 2, and then adding the y coordinates together and dividing those by 2. So let's try some examples here. So the first example says to find the midpoint of segment AB, and they give you the coordinates of A, the coordinates of B. So I'm going to call A my x1, y1, and then B my x2, y2. So to find the midpoint of AB, I'm going to start by adding the x coordinates together. So -2 plus 5, and then divide that by 2. And then add the y coordinates together. So -4 plus 6, and divide that by 2. So -2 plus 5 would give me 3. And then 3 divided by 2, I can either write it as 1.5 or 3 over 2 for the x. Then for the y, -4 plus 6 is +2. 2 divided by 2 would give me +1. So this would be where the midpoint of those 2 points would be located. So the midpoint would be in the middle here, 1.5, 1. Okay, number 2, again, it says find the midpoint of the segment, and it gives us the 2 endpoints. The only difference here is it just doesn't give us the diagram. So I'm going to call the first point my x1, y1, my second point the x2, y2, and then to find the midpoint, I'm going to add those x's together. So -2 plus 4 divided by 2, add the y's together, -4 plus 5, and divide that by 2. So the midpoint, when I simplify that, -2 plus 4 is 2. 2 divided by 2 would be +1. Then -4 plus 5 would be 1. Divided by 2 would be 1/2. Or you could write 0.5. That would be the midpoint of those two. Now, sometimes the examples aren't going to be as straightforward. They're not going to say find the midpoint. You just have to be able to recognize when to use the midpoint formula. So for example, in example 3, it says find the center of the circle, P, and P is supposed to be that point in the middle there. So technically, we know that if 2 points, Q and R, are on the circle and they're going through the center point, that would be considered the diameter of a circle. And we know that since all radii of a circle are congruent, P would be exactly in the middle of points Q and R. So we are going to use the midpoint formula to find the coordinates of point P. So again, I'm going to add those x coordinates together. So -6 plus 4 divided by 2. Then add the y coordinates together, 6 plus -2, and divide that by 2. So when I simplify, -6 plus 4 is -2 divided by 2 would give me -1. 6 plus -2 is 4, and then 4 divided by 2 is 2. So the coordinates of point P would be at -1, 2. Now, this last example is the most challenging example involving the midpoint formula because it says the midpoint of segment PQ is at 8, 3. If the coordinates of P are at 23, 5, find the coordinates of Q. So this time, they're giving us the midpoint of the segment. So we have segment PQ, and we already know where the midpoint is at. It's at 8, 3. And then point P is at 23, 5. And we're looking for the coordinates of point Q. So let's just call that coordinate x, y, since that's the one we don't know how to find. So we're still going to use the midpoint formula, but we're going to set it up. It's going to look a little different. To find the coordinate of Q, let's just label the midpoint as point M. So I know to find point M, I had to do the x's added together. So 23 plus whatever the x coordinate is of Q divided by 2. And then to find the y coordinate, I would have to add the y's together. So 5 plus whatever the y coordinate is of Q divided by 2. And I know that that coordinate is going to simplify to 8, 3. So now I'm just going to set up an equation to find x. So I'm basically just going to set 23 plus x divided by 2 equal to 8. And then solve that for x. So I would start by multiplying both sides by 2. So I get 23 plus x is equal to 16. And then subtract the 23 to get x is equal to negative 7. Now to find the y coordinate, I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to set the 5 plus y over 2 equal to the y coordinate of the midpoint, which is 3. So to solve for y, multiply both sides by 2. So I get 5 plus y is equal to 6. When I subtract the 5, I get y is equal to negative 1. So that means that point Q would have to be at negative 7, negative 1 in order for me to get the midpoint of P and Q to be at 8, 3. Again, you'll practice some more examples in class tomorrow. Feel free to ask your teacher if you have any additional questions.